Welcome to the McCall's 8358 Sew Along. I'm Julie Brown, one of the co-owners of Fabric Mart, and I'm really excited to produce this sew along for you just in time for spring. During the month of April, we will be sewing the McCall's 8358 dress pattern, which is a re-release of a vintage 1970s Laura Ashley pattern. The look is back in style, and there's a lot of really surprising details that go along with this pattern. To kick off this sew along, we're going to take a look at the pattern envelope and talk about some of the fabrics and notions that you might need. Then we will go over cutting instructions and anything else that will help you prepare for sewing. We will begin sewing together on April 10th. That's when the first video will be released on our YouTube page. And then each week after that in the month of April, another new video will come out so that by the end of the month, you will have hopefully a finished dress. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Just leave a comment down in the comments below. I'm happy to help you on your sewing journey, and I cannot wait to get started sewing with you all. Okay, we're going to get started here by looking at the pattern envelope, the front and the back, and then some of the pattern instructions, so that if you are a new sewist, you can better understand what some of the things mean that are on a pattern envelope and in the instructions. If you are familiar with sewing and are just here to do the sew along portion of the sew along, then you might be able to skip this part. Or if you feel that you might learn something, then stick around. So this is the front pattern envelope. It's McCall's 8358. And it tells you the size range that is in your pattern envelope. There is a size range below this that you might have, and you would be finding that out when we go to the other side when we talk about size chart. It's a Laura Ashley pattern from the 70s, and it's just like a really fun, unique dress that's really in style again. And you can see here that it has a view A and a view B. And we'll talk about the differences between those when we go to the other side more specifically. But, you know, at first glance, the things I can see are that view A have a ruffle attached to the bottom of the skirt. And then on view B, there's no ruffle. It's just a straight skirt. The other thing, too, is that there's a square neckline on view A and there's a wrap style on view B. But we'll see something interesting when we get to the back here. On view A, you see both the square neckline and the wrap neckline. And then down here at view B, you see the same thing. So this dress is literally a wear whatever way you want dress. You can change it up and wear it the wrap way one day and then the square neck the other day. So it's really kind of a very versatile dress. So here it just says a Missy's wrap dress, and then it gives you suggested fabrics, which we're going to go over the fabrics here in a second, as well as the notions. These are things that you particularly will need to finish the garment, such as elastic, or this is called a single fold bias tape, and we will go over those details in a little bit. The next thing here is the sizes, and the 6 through 14 would be the other size range in the other pattern envelope, and I have the 16 through 24. Okay, so this next line here is how you figure out what your size is. The sizing is very different than what you might wear in ready-to-wear garments, so please keep that in mind as you're looking at these. And don't be frustrated or deceived or discouraged by the measurements that you get. Your measurements are your measurements, and there is a lot of vanity sizing in ready-to-wear garments. So you want to look at first measuring your bust. That's the fullest part around your boobs, basically. And you want to measure that first. And then you'll measure your waist, and that would be the smallest part of your waistline or your lower torso. And then your hips, which is going to be the widest part. Or they suggest 9 inches below your waist. So I will show you examples of how I go about doing that to get my measurements, but I measured out at about a 16. Now my hips are bigger than a 16, but I am more worried about getting my bust to fit for this particular pattern because of how much ease this pattern has. Ease means the amount of extra space for wearability. And for also design, like if you want it to be a fuller dress, you need to have some design ease in there. So I'm looking down here at the finished garment measurements, and you can see that the hips are, you know, from size 6 all the way up to 24, they're 60 plus inches. My hips are definitely not 60 plus inches, so I felt safe to cut a straight size 16 because of how much ease is in this pattern. Also, because of the bust being 55.5 inches worth of ease, I felt that that was more than enough. And when I'm sewing it, I will be testing it out and checking it, and maybe even bringing it in a little bit more. We'll kind of see. And then the waist, again, has plenty of ease. The other thing to note here is that when you look here at these little line drawings, there's some ties that go along with it, and you will literally be able to make this smaller if you need it. It might just be a little fuller. Now, some of these recommendations are not things that I would recommend for maybe something more tailored, like a button-down shirt or a shirt dress, or, you know, something a little more fitted. I would definitely be doing some other alterations, but this pattern is pretty easy in the fit department. Okay, so once you find your size, you're going to look to see how many yards you're going to need. Now, my fabric that I had was 54 inches wide, so it's kind of in between there. There are some calculators that you can find online that can help you determine what yardage you would exactly need for a 54-inch wide piece of fabric. I'm going to say that 6 yards will be just about fine based off of that. For the 60-inch wide fabric, I need 5 3/4, and for the 45-inch, I need 6 3/4. For those of you that are not familiar with measuring your body, I'm going to go over that with you and then be able to compare it to the pattern. You want to take a long measuring tape, and we're going to measure the bust first. So you take the measuring tape and make sure that you are straight around. Now, I'm going to tell you that I'm pregnant, so my measurements are not what they are normally. So, but I feel very confident with what the pattern ease has, that I will be okay. And I'm also making this pattern to be able to wear after I'm done being pregnant. So my bust right now is a 41, but I know that I'm a 39 normally. But because of that ease that's in this pattern, I'm not worried. Okay, so after I measure my bust, we're going to do the waist and then the hips. So you want to find the smallest part of your waist, which is going to be a little harder to see on me maybe, but I'd say it's around here. You want to try to do this while looking in a mirror so that you can tell whether your tape measure is up or down. And that looks pretty good. And you want a nice snug measurement. So this is measuring at 39. Normally my waist is about 36, so you can tell that I'm definitely growing. But again, with that ease that's happening with this pattern, I'm not concerned. And then my hips would be the fullest part of my bottom. Make sure that I am straight. And a nice snug measurement again. And I'm measuring at 47. Normally I'm around like a 44 or 45. But again, because I'm growing, that's larger, and I'm not concerned because of how much ease is in this pattern. The place that I want to get the best fit is more so at the bust. And again, this one has a ton of ease in it. And it's still important to try to choose a size that's appropriate for you. You want the proportions to be right for your body. The suggested fabrics are lightweight cottons, cotton blends, chalets, and crepe de chines. So let me briefly talk about those different types of fabrics. So the first one that they mention is a lightweight cotton or a cotton blend. Those are going to be lighter weight, almost very light shirting fabrics, such as cotton lawns, cotton voiles or voiles is fine. Although if you use those, you might have to line them. So I think I would stick to probably like a cotton lawn. This one in particular is a Liberty of London cotton lawn. And when I bunch it up here, you can see that it falls in kind of nice a nice drape and gathers pretty nicely, but it is going to be a little bit fuller of a dress than perhaps some of the other fabrics that we talk about. So other lightweight cottons, you could look for nice soft shirtings, but you don't want anything that's super heavy or crisp, because the heavier that you go, the fuller that the dress is going to look, and it's just not going to look as nice and maybe as, especially because of this gathering there's a lot of gathering that's happening on there. And it also might not gather properly if it's a heavier fabric. So I think sticking to like a cotton lawn or a lightweight cotton like that would be a great option if you're going to do a cotton. Rayon chalets are a great option for this because they gather really, really nicely. This is a rayon chalet, and if I gather this up really well, it falls in nice little cones here. It gathers a lot in one area and is very drapey. Rayon is a great option for, specifically a rayon chalet is a great option for this dress because of all of the gathers. And rayon is washable, but you want to wash this fabric before you make anything because it will shrink. And then last is they recommend crepe de chine. Crepe de chine can come in both silk and polyester. The one that I have here is a silk, and you can see if I bunch this together or gather it together, it's going to have some nice folds and lay nicely and have some nice drape as well. Now, the crepe de chine also has a very, very fine textured crepe on the surface. It's very fine. Maybe you can see it from the back side a little bit better. So other types of silks that are going in that translucent to more opaque, but have this kind of drape could also be suitable too. And then if it's a polyester, it's going to have that same weave, but it's going to be a polyester blend, and it's still going to drape and gather the same. And then there's also some blouse weight polyesters, crepes, lighter weight crepes, and bubble crepes would be also a great option. A bubble crepe I don't have a sample of, but it's more heavily pebbled, but still has that nice drapey feel in hand. So I think going for drapey and a nice soft hand is a great kind of words to use when you're looking for the fabric that you want for the project. For my project, I will be using a cotton lawn from Liberty of London. And here you can see I already have it cut out. I did my video a little backwards, but this is the cotton lawn that I will be using from Liberty of London. Okay, let's talk about some of the extra notions that you need for this pattern. As I mentioned earlier, it shows you the notions and the fabric suggestions. The notions here for both views A and B call for 2 yards of 1/4 inch elastic. So that's just a basic 1/4 inch elastic, and I chose a white to go along with the fabric. You might choose a black or maybe a different color if you have access to that, depending on the fabric choice. Then it calls for 2 packages of 1/2 inch single fold bias tape. Single fold bias tape is something that you can usually find at your fabric or craft store, kind of like the big box type stores. And it comes like this, and it should have packaging on it. I get a lot of mine at yard sales and thrift shops, and it's very inexpensive, especially at the thrift shops. It might be a couple dollars in the big box store, but it's fabric that has been cut on the bias and then pressed and folded into a single fold bias tape. So we will be using this in our project today. Now, I would maybe choose a white to go along with this fabric, but because I was looking at what I had in my stash, these are the things that these are the colors that were close enough to what I have, and it's not something you're going to see in your garment from the outside. So I was safe to be okay using, you know, something that kind of coordinates but is not totally blending in. Okay, next let's talk about how to read the cutting instructions in a pattern. The pattern comes with different cutting layouts based on the width of your fabric, either 45 or 60 inches wide. And you can see that here for, in particular, dress A, I have 45 inches marked here. Here's the 60 inch and then a 60-inch again because of the different size ranges. So that might be a little different for each of the cutting layouts depending on the width of your fabric and which size you're using. I am using a fabric that's 54 inches wide, so in this case I'm going to be making up my own layout, which I'll show you visually how to do later. But if you have similar widths to the directions, then go ahead and follow these directions. So I'm just going to go ahead here and share with you a little bit about what some of these different notations mean. So at the top here, you're going to see it says right side of pattern and wrong side of pattern. It has some hazy dots on the wrong side, and then it's white for the right side of the pattern. And you would be looking at your pattern pieces on the drawings here. And that means that you would be flipping, for example, the right side of the pattern will be facing up for this piece, but the wrong side of the pattern would be facing up for this piece, because you want to have mirror images of each other. You don't want to cut out two of the same pattern piece in the same direction, because you have two different sides to your body and you don't want it to, it just is not a good thing if you do that. So let's look here at the next group here. It says right side of fabric and wrong side of fabric. The right side of the fabric has a darker shade, and then the wrong side of the fabric is white. So when you come over here to the dress A, you're cutting it in a single thickness. A single thickness here is that the right side of the fabric is facing up for this particular cutting layout, and the right side of the pattern will be facing up. So you're doing it in a single thickness because the pattern pieces are so large, you don't have the room to, fold your fabric on itself to, be able to get these pieces because they are so wide. But then over here, it is a double thickness pattern layout, and you can see it's double thickness laid over, but your selvages are matching. So it's not, oftentimes when you're folding a fabric, it's two selvages meeting and then there's a fold at the other end. This time you're folding the fabric onto itself and you're matching the selvages from one side on top of themselves, and then over here the selvages again would be on top of itself. So we can pretend that this is fabric and you would be folding it up on itself like this, and this would be the fold, and these two would be the selvages. As sewists, we're very used to folding our fabric this way with the selvages meeting each other, and then having a fold over here, and then this is like the yardage continuing in both directions. So I hope that makes sense. So you're really going to have to look at the layout of these different pieces because there's so many big pattern pieces. So really pay attention to your layout. Now, even if you're using a 45 or 60-inch fabric, you can still create your own layout like I'll be doing. I do it all the time, and some patterns are very generous with their yardage and layouts, and I like to see if I can get my pattern pieces into less yardage than they call for. But whichever way you choose, it's up to you. If you are a beginner, I would really suggest you follow these directions that are on your pattern instructions so that you don't forget something, to cut something that's really necessary. There's been too many times where I forgot to cut something and then I don't have enough fabric, and that really stinks. So following this segment, I will take you through the process of making my own layout as I go and what to keep in mind as you do it. Okay, so since I'm cutting out view A, I have a little bit shorter of a front piece here, and some of the other pieces will be shorter as far as the length of the skirt part. So you're going to be cutting these out in a single layer because of them being so wide, versus having the selvages folded together and cutting out in a double layer. So here is my number 2 front. You want to look for the big numbers that are on your pattern. When I'm laying out pattern pieces, I like to use pattern weights or pins. I might use a combination of both. It depends on kind of my mood sometimes. And you also want to make sure that you have a long ruler. You could have a yardstick. I have a clear ruler here for like quilting. And you want to line up your grain line. This is very, very, very important. So I'm lining up the edge of my ruler with the edge of my selvage here, and making sure there's going to be a line that has an arrow at the end. Now mine doesn't have an arrow at the end because it was at the bottom of the view B piece, but this line here is your grain line. So again, I'm lining that up. I'm trying to conserve as much of the fabric as possible, so I'm moving my pattern over to the selvage almost as much as I can, and then just making sure that my grain line here is nice and straight. So I'll take my pattern weights and flatten out my pattern piece. Once I kind of have it braced down, I take the ruler off because it tends to be in the way sometimes. But you can always go back and check it. Okay, so then I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Always remember to cut your notches. I like to cut a triangle out at the notch as I'm cutting it because I feel like it's a little bit more of a successful turnout for me than waiting till later. When I have a double notch or two triangles together, I make my notch that I cut bigger. Okay. So now this pattern piece here, it's the front for A and B. It says cut 2. So we want to make sure that we're cutting 2, but you want to have them in opposite directions. So when I lay out this pattern piece again, I'm going to pull my fabric down and then lay out the pattern piece again. I'm going to flip it so that the printing is face down instead of face up like it is right now. And lay it down again, but this time it is upside down. So my printing is laying the other direction. I'm going to do the same process of getting the grain line all lined up. So I'm lining up the edge of the ruler here with the edge of the fabric with the selvage, and then making sure that that grain line that's still, oh, that's the center front. Let's see. Here's the grain line. Just making sure that the grain line is lining up with the ruler. And then placing my weights again on here. Okay, so I have both sides, or both pieces of number 2 cut. And when I have to do the single layer cutting, I then take the other piece that I cut and lay it on top of the other, just so that I have them all together. And then I put them together with the pattern piece. And you can see here that if I open these up, right sides together, and they mirror each other, and so I know that I did that perfectly. And then here's the pattern piece. So it all lines up great. So I'm going to pull that back up and cut more. All right, so I moved my fabric down. So I have a bunch of fabric on this one side here. And I don't always follow the pattern placement recommendations for cutting. I don't know, I try to piece it out the way that I can, unless I really feel like it's a very, very complicated piece. And while yes, this is kind of complicated, I want to try to conserve as much of this fabric as possible. Right here, I just forgot to cut the view A length. So this is my view B here. And when I do cut off a lengthening feature to the pattern, or I always mark that this goes with whatever piece. So this, I'm going to mark one side front, view B. so that if I ever wanted to make view B, that I know that this pattern piece goes with this. Sometimes I would fold them up, but I just feel like in this instance, and for the sake of showing all of you, that I like to cut it off so that I don't get mixed up with anything else. Okay, so that actually makes it a little better because I can get this piece out of this little wedge that was left from cutting things out on this side. So I'm lining up the edge of the pattern piece here with the selvage edge and almost lining those up like that grain line. And you could get the ruler and measure this, but I am eyeballing it and it looks pretty darn good to me. So I'll take my weights again. And cut. And this one had, for side front number, the piece number 1, it says cut 1. All right, so that's piece 1, the side front. So I'm going to fold that up and put that aside. Okay, the next piece I'm going to cut out is the front ruffle. And this is calling for a cut 1. And because I'm right so close to the edge, I'm just lining up the edge of the pattern with the edge of the fabric. All right, so that is piece number 7, front ruffle for A. And I cut 1. The next step here is folding my fabric together with the selvages meeting. And I'm doing it right sides together. You can do wrong sides together. I'm just doing right sides together to keep kind of consistency's sake. The reason that I have it folded with the fabric being right sides together and having the selvage edges meeting is because pattern piece 3, which is the back piece for A and B, it calls for cut 1 on fold. Thankfully, the fabric is wide enough. Oops. Thankfully, the fabric is wide enough that it doesn't swing out past my selvage, because that is one big issue. Sometimes if it's a really big dress and you have yardage that is a little bit narrower than you know, the pattern piece. And that's actually why we were cutting in a single layer earlier. So, because those pattern pieces were so much wider, but they were also, you were only cutting one as one single piece. So I flipped my pattern piece over because all of my pattern pieces I have been cutting out facing you. And my center back on fold line here needs to be along the fold. I can't put it over there. So I'm flipping my pattern piece over to just make sure that all of my pieces are getting cut in the same direction. Now, I've had some people say to me, oh, well, that's okay. You could have flipped this around and had your pattern piece facing up and this and that. But I just feel like I was taught that everything should go in the same direction, and that's the practice that I do. So I recommend it, but you do you. Okay, so I got it all laid out and I'm going to cut this one. And this was cut 1 on the fold. I just remembered that I am cutting out view A, so I should have cut along this line. That's a little bit of an oops, but I know that I have plenty of fabric, so you know, if you don't have enough fabric, please, please, please make sure that you're cutting out the right length. But I know that I have more than enough. But I do need to flip this over and write 3 back for A and B. And This is the view B length. So that is my fault. So now I just have a little extra scrap piece over there. Okay, I am now going to cut out the sleeve for the pattern. This is piece number 4, and it just fits to be able to cut 2 at one time. If you have a 60-inch wide fabric, you should be perfectly fine. My fabric is about 54, 56 inches wide, so I am really pushing it by putting it on here. This is kind of one of those moments of do as I say, not as I do, because I am just trying to get what I can out of the fabric. I'm still lining it up with the selvage. I'm going to be just a hair short here, like 1/4 of an inch short, but you know, it's the sleeve, and this sleeve has very generous ease. So I think we're gonna be okay. Well, I know we're gonna be okay. Okay, so I'm going to cut it out. If you have fabric narrower than 54 inches, you definitely want to be cutting this out in single layers. And then just like we were doing earlier. Okay, so I have my selvage edge lined up here, and then my selvage edge is lined up down here where you can't see it because it falls off the edge of the island. But I also chose to do this because when I had my fabric the other way, my pattern piece is wider, it's a little bit wider than the island, so I would have been kind of cutting into nowhere. This allows me to cut into the fabric a lot better, and I'm going to be able to cut 2 here and then 2 here, and then I have to cut 1 more because it says cut 5. These are going to be a lot of ruffles. Okay, there isn't, here's the grain line, but I'm going to use the edge of my pattern piece because it is square. And I'm going to line that up here. Whoops. I'm going to line that up, the edge of my pattern piece with the selvage edge to cut that out. Ruffle pieces together and the pattern piece, and then folding those up. Because I cut things out the way that I did for the last ruffle piece, I have this really long strip, and it has the selvage edge on it, which just so happens to work with the piece number 6, the tie belt. That needs to have the grain line going the long way here. So that is perfect. And it says I need to cut 2. So let's see, is this piece going to be long enough for this pattern piece? Yes, it is. So I'm just going to cut a hunk of this, put the fabric aside. And I'm going to fold it in half. Now, when I fold in half, I'm trying to conserve as much of the fabric as possible. I know that I'm only going to be left with a little strip, but you know, I like to conserve. 2 pieces of piece number 6, the tie belt for views A and B. You will see a pattern piece here that's number 5. Number 5 is a guide for elastic for A and B, and that we will talk about later on. Okay, so we have everything cut out here. It is a lot, and I have some fabric left. I started with 6 3/4 yards, and I have just about a yard left. So I had pretty much exactly what I needed. It's a kind of a fabric hog pattern, but I think it's going to turn out really great.